Today's session, Why Didn't That Work, features Joanna Bell and Catherine Heller. I will briefly introduce them and then we'll go ahead and get started. So Joanna Bell is an experienced director of programs, marketing, and communications with a demonstrated history of working in the arts industry. She's a skilled media producer, grants manager, and with financial acumen, Her additional skills include securing media buys, advancing donor relations, event planning, database migration and management, strategic planning, and audience development. Catherine Heller is the Senior Communications Officer for the Walton Family Foundation. She is accredited in public relations with a diverse skill set in marketing, communications, team leadership, and business development. We're so glad to have them both here to talk about why that didn't work. I'm going to stop screen sharing. And then before we dive in, I'm sorry, I neglected to mention that there are just a few ground rules that we want to go over before we hop in. This session is really devised to give everyone an opportunity to realize that, sometimes it doesn't go right, and that's okay. We are all actively learning and growing in our professional and personal lives. And so just to build a sort of comfort within the group, we'd like to ask that you understand that there is vulnerability in sharing your mistakes. We ask that you are engaged and just minimize your distractions by silencing your cell phones and your notifications. We ask that you assume a positive intent behind other people's statements and behaviors, that you ask questions for clarification and not to attack other people's work, that you take the lessons and leave the people behind, right? So we want each of these sessions over the course of the week, and especially this one, to be something that you can take with you into the future. However, as we are sharing mistakes, we ask that you, just don't go around saying, well, Catherine Heller did X, Y, and Z, and it was all wrong. That you remember the lesson, but not necessarily the people. And that you use I statements, and when sharing, you take ownership of your ideas and your perceptions without assuming that it's a widely held belief. I know sometimes that is easier said than done. I myself am working through practicing that. Does anyone have any questions about that, or should we hop in? Great. Okay. Then let's get started. This will just be a basic Q&A session. I'm going to be asking Catherine and Johanna some questions. Again, if you have questions that you'd like to build in, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will be monitoring as we go. So let's get started. Catherine and Johanna, whoever wants to go first. Can you tell me, we're going to talk about building campaigns. Can you tell me about how you develop a campaign? Can you provide an example of something that you've done recently?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first, Joanna, if that's okay. Brittany, thank you for that lovely introduction. And I also appreciate the space that you're creating for this conversation by, all those suggestions and ground rules. So thank you to Cash for having us today. I am so excited this week is happening, and I hope everyone's been enjoying it. I will talk about a campaign that's going on right now and that's going well, because I learned from some previous mistakes, which we can address later. So this year, the Walton Family Foundation Home Region Program rolled out our new strategy for the Arkansas-Mississippi Delta, which is a region of the country on the east side of Arkansas, where I am from. And it's a really amazing part of the country. So campaigns for me start out with a lot of planning and a lot of talking to the subject matter expert. And so in my case, this is usually our program officers, which many of you may be familiar with. And so I'm always talking about the goals and the target audiences. I mean, those are the two main things. What's going to make this successful? What do you need for your strategy to be successful? What do you need from communications? And who's going to benefit from this? Like, who are you talking to? Most of my bigger campaigns contain kind of what I call an anchor element. So that's usually a video. We all know videos work really well. It doesn't have to be a video. It could be a webinar. It could be a conference. It could be a blog post. And then there's several supporting pieces of media and collateral around that anchor, right? This campaign included all of those elements. But one thing that's unique about this campaign is we're drawing it out a little bit. So I did have kind of a big ta-da moment several weeks ago, but right now we are in our roadshow style announcement, which is new for me, which means that I am trying to insert this conversation about rural communities and the importance of the Delta to our country in conferences and conversations across the country. So it's like this campaign is literally never ending, but it's going really well. So that's just, yeah, that's one campaign. That's a very high level of how I build it. So I'll throw it back to you, Brittany.
Is there, as part of this, is there anything that you wish that you had done differently? Anything that hasn't worked like you thought it might?
So I actually wanted to talk about this campaign because I have learned a lot recently about audience building and not taking your intended audience for granted. And so because I didn't do that, because I focused so much on audience building for this campaign, it's been really successful. So I actually want to briefly talk about other recent campaigns that didn't go as intended. And I know, Brittany, you've got some questions for us, later on in the conversation about this. So one of my lead efforts in this campaign was literal list building. We all rely on emails as I think that most of us use emails as one part of our campaigns, like how we are telling our message and getting that in front of people. And so I was list building from the beginning, trying to figure out, who these audiences were and how I could reach them. And so that included me reaching out to other organizations to say, I know you've already got these people. How can I get this campaign in front of your audience? How can I borrow your email list? And so just leveraging a lot of relationships and partnerships. And, in addition to actual list building for emails, which was one of my big efforts, I also took like a really hard and fresh look at my social media targeting, and just a lot of one-off emails saying, hey, can you please share this campaign for me? So yeah, we can get into how I learned all those lessons later on.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Joanna, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna sort of piggyback on what Catherine is saying, is that like everything in my work is incredibly audience focused, right? So, when we're at Theater Squared, there is an artist audience that we're talking to. There is an industry audience that we're talking to. There is our community audience, which is like the folks who we want to buy a ticket to the show and share this art with them. There is also, press who we're hoping can amplify the message, right? So we're talking to all of these different places at once. So every show that we have and every season that we have has a communication plan that is hopefully structured in such a way that we get the message out to all of these various and sundry audiences. But to Catherine's point, if you're not thinking about them all of the time in their individual buckets or redefining what that audience is as you go along, sometimes the message can miss your intended audience. So for instance, we've just closed a play called Miss You Like Hell, which is a musical. And so for that, we were looking for people who maybe like musicals, people who are interested in border issues, people who are interested in, Mexican-American culture, and people who were maybe first generation. But like finding how to find those people, sort of both in social media and sort of in our community targeting, is the challenge that we're always sort of going and reinventing and trying to figure out partnerships, like Catherine was saying, or, creating sort of space for those conversations and welcoming, right? Because one of the challenges that faces an arts organization, and I'm sure you guys all feel the same thing. In fact, many of these people in this room I know feel the same way all the time, and I would actually go to them for advice. So thanks for being here. There's only, the NEA tells us that only 25% of Americans will ever see a live play performance, right? So that's, we're going from a place where, your total audience size is automatically restricted to a quarter of like what that could be, that who has a propensity to come to the live theater. So how do we sort of up that percentage in aggregate for our region is sort of what I'm always thinking about, is how do I convince more people to come to live theater who maybe aren't geared towards that initially. So we're doing, a ton of, outreach into, for Chad Deity, we tried really hard to get to the professional wrestling community, like in Northwest Arkansas, which is a small but mighty community. And I'm thrilled to have had that enriching experience with them. But, it's sort of finding, where does your message meet your audience, I think is the real key. And it's not always, if you build it, they will come. And that's where we learn things.
Is there, as a part of, let's go with Chad Deity, I actually saw that show, and I am not a part of the wrestling community, but I thought it was fantastic. Is there anything in that specific campaign that you wish that you would have done differently when building that out?
Yes. I was just chatting with Sharon about, yes, the wrestling and the Art Ventures partnership is so important, right? Because it is so, when I think about Chad Deity, I think maybe we focused, we got too far away from our core consumer, right? With that marketing. We did a lot of list buys in the sports affinity groups, but ignored the fact that our data for the entire pandemic has told us that women are the decision makers, right? So the sports affinity list that we purchased perhaps skewed more heavily, to a gender that was male and to a gender that like makes sports buys decisions and not arts buys. And so I feel like one of the missteps that we made in that sort of audience building process was that we leaned too far in the sort of niche direction and didn't make it clear enough to our core, our ideal purchasing person who always shows up for us, that this show is really for them, because it was really for them. It was the more emotional side of the sport, and it was like a soap opera meets wrestling, right? And so that was sort of, maybe we could have done more intentional targeting and had a stronger result. If that makes sense to anyone.
That was such a good play, and I will add that everyone should have a chance to see that actor in real life.
Yes.
He's impressive.
Yeah, Sean Middlebrooks is not to be missed. He's a special person. He's a special performer.
Hey, Joanna, it's so funny hearing you talk about the data. The data showed us that it's the women, and I work with Cash, and so we are gathering data. One of the things we do is research and listening to figure out to be able to base our decisions off of data. However, I also come from a background of being the executive director of a very small nonprofit, and it was hard for us to get data. And so I also wonder who's in the room right now, and just trying to gauge what organizations are represented here to know kind of where we're at with, do you have access to data about who your target audience is? So do you mind if I ask, could everybody just put in the chat real quick your organization that you represent? And yeah, just curious, maybe if you could also, I could give you a second layer of homework. After you've put your organization or whoever you're affiliated with, maybe you're creative, in the chat, can you put a 1 in the chat if you base your communications decisions off of data? And it's okay to not answer. I'm just curious. Put a 1 in the chat if you feel confident that you make communication decisions based on data. Mr. Video, was that a like 0? like no, we don't have data. 0. Okay, thanks. Okay.
0.75.
I was going to say with 0.75.
Okay.
I have to agree with that for myself.
Not 100% of the time.
Oh, Paul, I like it.
I'm Emily, are you saying 0 as well since you didn't answer? I'm just curious. This is interesting. Just the organizations that we have, because Mount Sequoia, you're a pretty decent sized, mid-sized organization. Yeah, that's just interesting that we're definitely seeing that there's a mixture. Experience Fayetteville, yep. You've got data. Okay, back to you, Brittany. I was just curious.
Okay. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. We want to also talk about accessibility and accessible communications. As many of you are probably aware, accessibility has become incredibly important in all manner of mediums. But in communications, it can range from anything from including image descriptions on your website or social media to thinking about whether or not you want to do translation and then in what languages. Joanna and Catherine, whoever wants to go first, how have you embraced accessibility in your work?
I'll jump first because I think it's probably more, Catherine's answer might be more broadly accessible. We're trying really, really hard to, as we come out of our pandemic intermission, to be more accessible to as many people as possible. Obviously the building itself is physically accessible, but that doesn't mean that the show itself is. So part of building the new building was allowing us to sort of put some new accessibility measures in place. So now we have audio described performance and we have assistive listening devices. We're still working really hard to get translation. When we do plays as new as ours, it's very challenging to get that done in real time when the script is changing. And so we're working towards figuring out the best solution for that and what technology might be able to help us. But balancing that against expense has been a challenge for us.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Sharon, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to come out, with enough clarity. But part of what we do is build the list, and that for us means going into the communities, and as opposed to maybe getting a list, although some of that is really valuable, but to get a real handle and to become like one with the people, we have to go in. And so it's been a bit challenging over the last 2.5 years. And so our plan, our media plan is, kind of has been stymied a little bit. And so that's why I put 0.75, I was glad to see somebody put less than 100% because I don't feel like our list is full. And how beyond going into the communities, and as small as we are, we do this, and we do it with people, that it's, it's a challenge for us. So I feel like it's a continual process for us, and
Yes.
Keep trying to get to 100%, and that probably won't ever happen. But is that something that you've had to deal with? And how do you mitigate, the business, going to the wrong audience, or not the wrong audience necessarily, but not focusing deeply into your the people that are supposed to really be the ones that are invited, like for the show that you're just talking about. Anybody?
Well, I'll volunteer that one of the big challenges for us as for the Year Squared as an organization as we've grown is moving from a relationship model that is one-to-one, where it's very relational based on individuals and community, and trying to scale that up, right? So how can we sort of open that top of funnel so that we can be more welcoming and more inclusive, and but also, because the more you grow, the less you can sustain that one-to-one relationship model, right? You can build those relationships once you have those people in your building or in your place, but you can't necessarily be out in community at the scale that you would need to convert the right number of people to come in. So we have to think about other new ways to open that top of funnel. I know that we've been experimenting with geofencing, right? Where we're putting sort of digital tracing around like who is in what communities at what times and like at what events, and how can we message to them in a way that says, hey, we are also here, both in sort of town or at like specific community events, right? So, we have a geofence that's generally around, like we did it for Pride, for instance, right? Like we knew that everyone who was going to be at the Pride Parade was somebody that our work would probably resonate with. And so now we have the opportunity to sort of target some ads at them and sort of tell the story of Theater Squared in the same way that we would in person with digital placement. So we're sort of saying, here is what it looks like at a Friday night at Theater Squared. Here's what it looks like to experience our art. Here's what it looks like. We're a resource for you. And here are our accessibility programs, right? So we're putting all that story out into their sort of digital world, and then seeing who opts in, and then building a relationship sort of with those people who are engaging. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But it's limiting, right? Because what we dream of is having enough human bodies on staff that we can build all of those relationships all of the time.
How costly is doing the geofencing?
I mean, I think that if you want to sort of use a tool that exists like a Facebook or other social media buys like that, like you can geo-target pretty much down to your physical location or a specific physical location and time. So that's extremely affordable. Like a $5 spend with some really limited geo-targeting can get you really good results.
Okay.
But getting more sophisticated and sort of like throwing up a geofence around an event, it's a little bit more expensive. For us, it runs about $1,000.
Okay.
And then we have to retarget them. We don't own that data. A third party owns that data.
Yeah, so that's the geofencing for, say, the Pride parade and accompanying celebrations is what I was curious about. So that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, and that just happens. So we're gonna, we're gonna watch those results and see what comes back from that. Our hope is that we see really qualified leads and really good new connections with people that we didn't otherwise know, but we may not. We may just be seeing our same audience in that mix. So we're going to watch how they behave over the next sort of 3 or 4 months.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to call attention to Kelsey's point in the chat. So she's connecting, basic kind of accessibility strategy through communication to how like our actual programming and how we are actually connecting with real people through our services and through our programming. And so like those of us who just play the role of a comms person, I mean, we can sit behind our computers all day, right? And we can like design really sophisticated, strategies that, have all these accessible elements. But if you're not working with, in my case, it's program officers. In Joanna's case, it is your like directors and producers, I guess, to talk about the programming and to make sure that the services you offer and the programs that you offer are also accessible. Is an extremely important part. At the foundation, we talk a lot about, and this actually ties back into Theater Squared, we talk a lot about what we call inclusive shared spaces. So it's accessibility via a physical space. It's making sure that your programming and that your space is welcoming and open to the communities that you serve. And I think that Theater Square does an amazing example of that with their lineup throughout the year. I think that another really great example is Rail Yard Park in downtown Rogers with the types of programming that they offer. And so, yes, accessibility is, to me, an incredibly important part of what comms professionals do, but it has to be done in tandem with the rest of your team. And then I'll also, so Joanna at the very beginning was talking about just like tools and technology that we can use, right? And so I feel like that's absolutely something I'm woefully behind on, and to be honest, even our team is a little bit behind on. We have recently brought in experts to help us audit all of our materials, and the results, I was like, what? That blog post I produced was an amazing work of prose, and you're telling me that like it's not very readable. As somebody with an education and background in journalism and communications, I mistakenly felt that I knew what words meant and understood how to use them. And I have had, I will fully admit, a big wake up call when it comes to accessible communications. I will say that there is a tool that I've been using a lot lately. Yes, exactly, Joanna. Writing to a sixth grade level is so key for wide accessibility. And I have recently discovered, I'm sure everybody else knows about this, but I think it's called readable.com. You can actually just Google readability tools. Lissy, you're shaking your head. It is extremely helpful in simplifying your writing.
So, Catherine, I have a question for you that I think a lot of us can kind of empathize with. When you work for an organization of a certain scale and you're pumping out content consistently, you've got deadlines, you've got so much happening that you just need to get out of the door. How do you, when you get to that point where you say, this is not what I thought it was, how do you navigate pulling back or pulling your team back and having this moment of like, ooh, we got to work on this. Like, we got to pause for a second. How does that work for you?
I so appreciate that question, because that is a scenario that I run into a lot, and that I'm sure we all run into a lot. And so I will say it's almost like a personal exercise, right? It's like things you learn in therapy. I mean, I have to first be aware enough and know that it is my responsibility as the communications lead to recognize those issues. So that is a daily practice in and of itself. And then second, I have to be confident enough to speak up and say, this isn't ready. I know our deadline is tomorrow, but my recommendation is, that's what I typically lead with. My recommendation is that we adjust our schedule 48 hours or until Monday of next week, because these are serious issues that impact our grantees, that impact their audiences, and that ultimately impact our stakeholders. So it is truly a practice in confidence for me, speaking up for my work and speaking up for my expertise that we all have here on this call today in communications. You can't just let something slide. Not that I haven't before. I will fully admit it and say I had to get that across the line. But Brittany, that's such a great question. I'm happy to talk more about that too, if anyone has any questions.
Does anyone have any questions that they want to toss out?
I just want to appreciate when you mentioned, Catherine, about getting it over the line versus like what you want it to be professionally. I feel like I have like two little beings on my shoulders. Like one is screaming, done is beautiful, done is beautiful. And the other one's like screaming, you can do better, you can do better. And I have to decide who I'm going with on a particular day.
It's so true. It is absolutely true.
Are there
because sometimes done is beautiful.
It is. Yeah, there are certain things that, I mean, you cannot be the ultimate perfectionist or hold the team back or hold back, a grantee project or something like that. You're absolutely right. And so the more we practice this, the more we catch things around accessibility and ease of reading early on.
I think someone mentioned writing to a sixth grade scale. Can you talk a little bit about what that process is like, or how you approach that? Because I think a lot of us, especially people who write for their professions, write because they have to, write because they like it for whatever reason. Most of us are looking to make everything sound amazing, make it sound like the best it could be. We want to use that word that sounds incredible, that maybe nobody's ever heard of, but it sounds great to me. How do you walk it back if that's a thing that you have to actively practice?
Joanna, do you want to start?
Sure. I can say that, it's about taking the copy. For me, it's about taking the copy down to its simplest forms, right? Like action words, simple sentence structure, avoiding the passive voice, right? Like these basic rules that you're taught when you're sort of writing, the foundations of English writing, right? So you're sort of trying to strip that copy down to the most readable and the most active version of itself, right? And knowing what copy is for what audience. I am less concerned about the readability of my press release from a grade level than I am about my marketing copy, because I know who that audience is in that press room, and that press room does want to know all of the a little bit more about the nitty-gritty details, and they want to know a little bit more about what makes the show special, and we can throw in more quotes and make it a little more complex. Whereas we are just trying to communicate the story to the widest possible audience sort of in our marketing copy and make it feel compelling. And so that's, it's just like Catherine was saying, it's a constant practice. You have to sort of be thinking. I know particularly in the arts where you are struggling against a perception of elitism from the jump. And so if it's already something that a growing audience maybe doesn't think is for them, copy especially can be alienating. And so you have to find a way to break that barrier down, and putting more awards and accolades and Pulitzer Prizes and things like that sometimes make it feel even more not for me. So that's something that we're actively trying to practice more of.
So I can add to that. Really, all I can add is a challenge rather than a solution. But for me, a lot of what I do is rooted in everything I do is rooted in the Walton Family Foundation strategy. So we have a written strategy, right? It is available on our website. It was created by incredibly smart and thorough people, academics, research professionals. It is serious. And so already the words that I'm dealing with are a little bit complicated or vague. Like I've already said, inclusive shared spaces. What does that mean? Career pathways. That's something that what does that mean? And so I guess my point here is that a lot of us are getting things from our bosses, from our research team, just various things. And it's almost like you have to make up a new language for them, right? Like it's interpretation. And then the other challenge is that I hear the term inclusive shared spaces 10 times a day, right? I'm used to it. I have internalized it. I know what it means just like that. I can picture it. And so I think also part of this daily practice is not internalizing terms, like Joanna said, that sound elitist, that somebody's going to gloss right over because they're kind of complicated. So I think that it's also our responsibility to make sure that we're, always aware of what we've become used to.
Has there ever been a time when you put something out there into the world and had to walk it back and had to say like, okay, inclusive, we all assume that everyone knew what inclusive shared spaces were, and now we've got to go back and restart?
Yes, I can think of a few examples. One, workforce development is something that we talk a lot about, and it's similar to career pathways. Don't y'all just love all of these phrases I'm talking about? It means like how economic mobility. So how do adults learn new skills at any point in their life so that they can get a better paying job? And we did have a campaign around workforce development, where really I feel like I may have made a mistake in just thinking about the business community as the main audience, because we were thinking, oh, we need internships, we need job opportunities, we need the business community to buy into this. But if we don't have a pipeline of adults wanting to learn new skills, to get those jobs or internships or apprenticeships, it doesn't matter. And so I think that I did create an overly complicated campaign by not really talking about the impact of workforce development. What does this person look like? What are they doing right now? What could they be doing if they go through a program like this? And I relied too heavily on the workforce development phrase and assuming the understanding of the business community. So that's actually something that I'm going to try to get back to this fall in one of my campaigns and make it a little bit better.
I want to take a moment to, I'm keeping an eye on the chat. Srividya, would you mind unmuting and just kind of walking us through your comment about adding costs to individual artists and small size organizations?
Yeah, so we worked, Rave Cultural Foundation works very closely with local artists here, Indian origin artists, and when we interact with them and we are trying to support them in in moving ahead in their careers and how they can prepare themselves and things like that, what we are noticing is like one of the biggest problems is communication. And it is not just language based. That's another whole big thing, where everything that we do in terms of marketing and all this stuff is in English. And for organizations like ours, where we are dealing with artistic work which is in different languages, it's even harder. And how you promote to different languages, that's just another ball game. I don't want to even talk about that right now, but just the cost, and I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about time, about mentoring time, about coaching time, about sharing with people, like helping them, hold their hand at first few steps, to get to a place where they can go and search on Google or look up things and and get more educated and informed about all these things. And I keep calling, I've also run a business, and I keep calling social media, just the media by itself, it's just a big beast with its own language and its own rules and everything. And for the average person who comes to arts, especially with passion, we keep talking about that, passion is what holds us all together, frankly. So with passion, you try to add this, it's a mess. So I mean, this goes back to that, you're set up to not succeed, just because the access to these resources is so time consuming. Like I keep saying, forget even the money, just it's so tiring. And especially for individual artists, when they are trying to manage, your artistic life with a family, especially, you bring in a bigger family. If you're by yourself, that's a different issue again. Not to take away from people who don't have families, but But you get my point. It's so much more challenging. Every layer, it just keeps adding more and more things, and then on top of that, you have to deal with this beast, which is not easily tamed at all. It's just a non-starter pretty much, and we just keep going down the spiral, instead of. Okay, so it just requires a lot of effort to do that. So are there ways, Cash already has, I know they have these one-on-one consultations and things like that, but, how are we as a community really helping mitigate some of that down spiral, so that we can keep pushing more and more people above. So, but thank you. I mean, this is a very great conversation. Thank you so much. Learning a lot.
Sharon,
yeah, I'd like to interject. And it's about the time. Just riffing off of what Sylvia just said. We are so proud that the Walton Family Foundation, is here, and you are there, Catherine, and that Theater Square, is got Brick. And that's like the things that the same stuff that you're thinking about and that you do, the small organizations are doing, and it's like happening as a fraction of the individual or individuals who are in the space. We got 4 people or 3 people for the whole thing, and we tend to think big, and the reason we have to think big or nothing happens, and it's a true challenge, and all the things that you're discussing, we are going to affect somehow, and it does cost more for the individuals who will have to affect that, and just the organization in general, and we are trying at the same time to not like overstress people, and not, to become a different kind of space in the arts, because I think most of us in the arts here, yeah, probably so, that we're trying to make change in this in the economy and the way we function, and I don't know, it's always good to have these ideas, and I can tell you that I think about all these things and try to affect them, or make it, do it. But I win less, I think. I win less than I would like to win, because of how much we don't have, essentially. You know what I mean?
I definitely feel that, Sharon, and sort of to go back to what Catherine was saying about sort of the mission and the vision and the sort of the articulated strategy. I think that is the mark of a very mature organization, right? And that has a lot of resource behind it. But that doesn't mean that you have to have that first, right? I think particularly when you're an individual artist or you're a very small organization and your mission and your vision is very tied to your artistic practice or to your lived experience, and your place in community, I think the articulation of that is much more natural, right? Like you don't have to disseminate the message to a bunch of staff members who are then going to communicate it outward. So I think there are pluses and there are minuses, but there is some nimbleness to being, smaller and more agile in these moments for communication for a smaller organization in some ways. And then I think I just want to take a minute to sort of talk about the technology piece and the social media beast, and remind us all that there's strategy and then there are tactics, right? And that you can't, in this conversation, we've been a little bit free flowing, and we've gone from some tactics where I'm geofencing and social media presence, right? Geofencing your social media presence is a bonus. That's a tactic that refines that strategy. And just listening to the strategy from the beginning, I feel is something that you can go back to and say, okay, there are degrees of refinement. We can have, copy that is written to a 6th grade level. We can have copy that is directly from the artist. Both of these things are valid, right? Like as your organization grows and your organization, matures, you can sort of get really in the nitty gritty and make that copy as, optimized as possible. But telling the story of the artwork is the most important thing. So we can't let like the tactics get in the way of the strategy. It's sort of what I want to lift up for the room.
I think that is so smart. I completely agree with that. And if I could just offer a couple of tactics, because sometimes it's okay to just focus in on a couple of things. Like it is okay not to need to save the world with your work. So, and what I'm saying it might sound like it's counteracting what Joanna is saying, but it is actually building. It just depends on like how you think about strategies and tactics and objectives and like all of those planning words. But I do think that it's okay if you kind of narrow in on what you can do best. And Srividya, I've seen your marketing materials, I've seen your press releases, and you're doing an amazing job. And so if I could offer a couple of tactics that you could keep in mind, one, templates. So you can get templates from me. You can get templates from Cash, I bet. And a news release template, a media advisory, maybe how to structure a paid social media post. I don't know. Templates are your friend. You should not be reinventing the wheel for every new campaign. And then two, you also don't have to be everywhere. So maybe take 2 platforms where maybe the majority of your audience already is. So Srividya, let's say you take Facebook and you take media outreach, and that's what you worry about. You don't need to worry about Instagram. Instagram's difficult because of all the photography you have to have. We struggle with Instagram. Like, just do Facebook really well, and that's it. Learn how to use its features, post, create events, and you're done. And then maybe you move on to media relations, because I think you're already doing a great job there. And then that's where you bring in your template. So simplify if you're feeling overwhelmed.
I'll also piggyback on to say that social media is really hard. The days of like posting, an overexposed like photo of your dinner or whatever those are over. It feels like, and on top of that, Facebook and Instagram are consistently changing the way that they do their algorithms, the way that they do content, what's prioritized, what's not. So it is really difficult. And even the largest organizations that I've worked at, the smallest organizations that I've worked at, everyone is struggling to keep up. So don't feel like you're alone there.
Okay.
I will also say that all of the platforms know that you feel overwhelmed, right? And like they will set you up a call with their marketing experts to basically, they tell you what they're natively boosting and what the algorithm likes, right? Like they're going to tell you that in an effort to get you to spend a little more money on their platform. You don't have to choose to spend more money on their platform, but you can listen to what their trained staff is telling you what might be most effective for your desired outcome. And that's like a half an hour long, and then you can learn some stuff and then not pay them for
it. Can you say that again in a different way? Because I'm processing it. You mean like can you?
Sure. So like Facebook,
it feels juicy.
Google, yeah, Facebook and Google and TikTok, they all want you to spend money on their platforms, right? They want you to spend money there. So they have these marketing experts who are available for calls and consultations. So you can like sit down for a half an hour with them, and they basically tell you what the algorithm is loving right now, right? They're like, if you put up a video, that's going to get 75% more engagement on average, right? And then you're like, okay, cool, I should spend my time making a video, right? Like, they can better help you understand the results that you have, and also like kind of guide you towards content that will be more relevant to your desired audience. That doesn't mean you have to spend any more money, and it doesn't mean you have to do what they say, but you can hear what they think the algorithm is up to right now. And that, like, I think is worth as much as some consultants that I've had in my life.
It feels like we're kind of at a potential like moment where we can decide which direction we want to go. So I have scripted questions that I was going to ask Joanna and Catherine, but it feels like maybe the conversation is going in a more sort of natural direction. I'm wondering if people feel really strongly about just keeping that going. I think that's perfectly fine. Is there anyone who feels really strongly one way or another?
I mean, Brittany, you've been asking such good questions to get us here. So I, for one, trust you to keep going, but.
Well, some of these I'm just going with the flow of the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about, since we've been talking about social media, about how you widen your audience and reach people. Joanna and Catherine, have there ever been times, and now my cat's here, sorry, where you thought you were making progress with a community or a new medium or whichever direction you want to take this in? And how did you realize that you were off base?
I need a moment to think. Also, Joanna, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I am not a social media expert. So if you have hot tips on that, let us know.
I am by no means an expert. I'm a dabbler at best.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, but I'm responsible for sort of what goes up on Theater Square's all of our channels, right? And so ultimately crafting campaigns that sort of drive some kind of results. And we've been fortunate that they have. But yeah, it's not always a slam dunk. And I can say that, like, you know, from being a theater company, there's been a number of times as we have embraced our mission to, you know, have theater be an agent of social change, that we have missed the mark in reaching the audiences that we hoped would come out, right? Like there are some things that are true about American theater audiences in Arkansas that are just like, there's a natural audience that comes out, and that audience is not necessarily one that always reflects the full diversity of our community. And so we want to sort of be intentional about who we invite to space, but sometimes people don't accept our invitations, and that is okay too, because sort of continuing to tell stories that are not expected stories for our core audience is actually eye-opening and conversation starting. So we have to make sure that we're both equipped for who we are welcoming to space and who we are continuing to have relationships with over time. And sort of that ended up with us creating sort of a patron code of conduct and how we create relationships and to whom we sustain relationships, and when those relationships are in conflict, how we make those choices as an institution. And that's been profoundly helpful. And that is on our website if that is of interest to anyone in this room.
I understand that problem, and I think it's across the board for everybody I know, me, us, all. Even sometimes when your audience, your audience needs to be a certain thing to say that you're doing the work, and so there are strategies that are different than social media that we have to employ. And sometimes, it's not necessarily in an email or a letter or anything like that. And it's almost like a boots on the ground kind of thing. And then it impacts everything else. How do you get into those spaces, and making sure that, and it's a plan, it's intentional, and it takes time and all the things. And, all these things matter. And sometimes I'm like, what are we doing with the social media? How much time are we spending on social media as opposed to boots on the ground. And how does that work? And even after we find the right people to disseminate the message, how are you making sure that that person feels enveloped? And, because
and
do you
feels
have
like
enough
they
people to
can
envelop
be
that?
an advocate and an evangelist out in the world for your organization and for your mission. Yeah, it's very challenging.
Yeah, and that takes, hugging up and deep relationship.
Yeah, that kind of work
Anyway.
takes years. So like we as an institution can no longer rely on like, oh, this is a show that we need this audience here for. Like we need to come up with ways to sort of build that audience over all of our stories, over all of our shows, and all of those conversations.
When I saw, and so I appreciate the successes and the failures. We don't call it failures in art, we call it about learning. We call it about your failures are actually learning how to do the next thing, how to do it better. And so, I guess we can even say the word failures, but it doesn't mean the same thing as some other folks think. I saw Catherine's, what do you call it? You called it something when you first started talking about it. The home region program, focused audience building, I think. And I saw it, and I like the idea of, I looked beyond just the first piece, and saw that people are looking like every person. It's like a more casual approach to the introduction from the highest level at Walton's home region. And then middle people, and then when you went into the areas that the people that you want to make an effect, you want to make change or whatever, you found the folks who are doing the work inside the spaces. And I thought it was really good that you let them be leadership in the videos, and they will figure. I said to myself, I said they had got the attention of that group of people that you're trying to affect, and they're going to the message is they're gonna figure out how to get that message to the people. And I've been saying the same stuff that I'm telling you is how I've worked forever, and it's always been hard for me. I'm just so pleased to see that there's a change there, because there's valuable financial support that the various communities need to get. And when they get it and it doesn't, or when it goes forward and it doesn't work, I was glad to see the shift before this. You did this revisioning and made it happen. When the not so good things happened, you were able to pivot, and you obviously listen to the people that need to be listened to. And so I feel pretty good about that, being living here in this region and knowing where the money, where our region and the people have put their money, and that the Waltons are kind of, homegrown, and they're looking to make something work. You didn't just say, oh, what the hell, we can't do that anymore because it's not going to happen. You pivoted, like we all kind of have to if we want to survive.
I think that's no, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think that's a really good point. And then also to Kelsey's point in the chat about listening to our audiences. So yes, we all want to grow our audiences, and we need more people to buy more tickets, and we need more butts and seats. So who is already there, and why are they there? And how can we capture that information? By one-offs with one-on-ones with one of your best customers, with surveys to a core group of people that show up consistently, your peers in the same space. I mean, there's a lot of sourcing. I mean, we at the foundation do that too. We are actively listening to the organizations like you guys that are actually doing the work. And I think small to medium sized organizations can turn around and listen to and learn from the people that are engaged in your programming, and try to make more of them, right? What is appealing to them, and how can you spread that?
And for those of you who are repeats, in the very first session with Cedric Fonville and Erica Harmon, it was all about ask your audience what they think your organization is all about, and have that, like, look at that mirror carefully. So you may have your communication strategy, you may have like a framework of how you're talking about your organization. Check that with your mirror of your audience. And you don't have to be a large institution to do that and kind of gut check that. So I appreciate you saying that, Catherine.
I also want to sort of just throw out there too, make sure that you are cultivating not an audience for a specific event or a specific piece of work, but for an artistic vision, right? Particularly in the arts, because the artistic vision is not always going to be exactly the same, right? If they very much liked the art pieces that you had 2 years ago, that maybe isn't the artistic direction of the organization in full for a lifetime. And so you have to like make sure your communication strategy is bringing the mirror along with you, and so that they're not looking back in time, and that the art continues to advance and continues to be at the center of the work.
So we are into our final few minutes. I just want to kind of put an all call out there that if you haven't asked a question or you haven't kind of weighed in with anything that you've got going on, please feel free to do so. We want to make sure that everyone leaves feeling like they've learned something new, that they've got what they need to get going. So. Okay. Any final thoughts, Joanna, Catherine, anything that you didn't get to discuss that you wanted to talk about?
This was such a great discussion. I learned so much from everybody here and from Joanna. So I appreciate y'all having me.
Thank you. I feel 100% the same. So thank you all for being here. There's so many wonderful people in this room, and I look forward to having you like all in the larger life of the artistic community in Northwest Arkansas for many years to come. So this is going to be exciting. And I just want to also sort of lift up for the room one more last time the same message that Sharon was mentioning earlier, that a failure is not a setback. A failure is a learning opportunity, and missteps along the way, like we're figuring it out as we go. And so celebrate the wins and celebrate, those setbacks as well.
Thank you both for participating, and thank you everyone for joining. I just have a couple more things that I'd like to mention before we all hop off. I'm going to share my screen here one last time. Okay. So we would love it if you could stay in touch with Cash. We have a couple of different ways for you to share what's going on with your organizations. And if you are an artist or practicing artist, what's going on within your practice and your work. Our Arkansas Community Calendar is all things arts and culture in the region. It doesn't matter if you live in Bella Vista or in Fayetteville or even Siloam Springs. We would encourage you to share your events, share your gatherings, share your art openings through that calendar. You can go in and just add whatever you've got going on. It doesn't need any sort of formal approval or anything. Feel free to use that whenever you've got anything coming up. We also have a directory that we are retooling, but we will use that as a place for artists, creatives to share that they are available for hire, available for work. If you're a graphic designer, If you need a graphic designer, a photographer, whatever it might be, you're welcome to use the directory to get in touch with someone in the community who can help you out with your project. Cash has a newsletter. You are welcome to follow along. It's down there at the bottom of our website. And then we have more resources for our year of learning and outreach available on our website. If you go to resources in the middle sort of menu, and then down below, you'll see everything that we've got in regards to our year of learning and outreach. Like I mentioned before, there are artist conversations, there are building music businesses, there's a slew of conversations that will be happening over the course of this year. So we would encourage you to follow along there on social media. I am our social media person, and I am doing the best that I can, as we learned this afternoon or this morning. So please keep in touch. We'd love to work with you. We'd love to help you. We'd love to support you, cheer you on, whatever it might be.